Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today I'm tackling the top 25 licensed video games. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these games are going to be old. That's not because of any preference to older games necessarily, it's just they don't really make licensed video games like they used to. It used to be every cartoon and movie and toy and board game and everything that existed got a video game. That's not the case anymore. Cartoons don't get video games. Movies don't get video games. I mean, we still get Star Wars, but Star Wars isn't a movie anymore. It's in its own world, its own universe. It's bigger than just movies. But back in the 90s, 80s, early 2000s, if a movie got made, didn't matter if it was a blockbuster or just a kid's movie, it got a video game. They don't do that anymore. So a lot of these are going to be older games because of that. But there are some surprises on this list. Number 25 isn't going to surprise anybody. It's Kingdom Hearts for the PS2. But it has also been upgraded and re-released on modern consoles over the years. So any iteration you play really is going to be rock solid. I need to turn this light on. There we go. Kingdom Hearts is two properties. The licensed property is Disney characters, Mickey Mouse, Goofy, Donald Duck, and I guess Pluto and others. And it's set in the sort of world of Final Fantasy, although there is no technically world of Final Fantasy. It's basically a Final Fantasy game with Disney characters is essentially what it is, more or less. But it's a great game. I loved it. I have one of, I'm not sure which one, the HD remakes, either on PS3 or PS4, I can't remember, but I do have a more modern version of the game, and it's a hella fun game. Number 24 is actually an interesting one because it was made at a time before crossovers were the norm, even before Freddy vs. Jason, which sort of set the template for crossover films, which we didn't really have a lot of. The video game is Alien vs. Predator, the arcade game. This is an arcade side-scrolling beat-em-up that is, to the best of my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, please, never been re-released on modern consoles. Not officially, anyways. Number 23, I actually should take off the list because I made this list a few months ago. Unfortunately, number 23 is no longer playable. It was Friday the 13th Online, but that game has been basically shut down. And when fans tried to revive it with fan servers, the IP owners shut that down. So I don't know what is the current status of this game, but I still put it on the list because a lot of these games are inaccessible, so it still counts. Speaking of which, number 22 is one of my personal favorite games. I couldn't rank it higher on the list just because it's not the best game on this list compared to others, but it's still a lot better than some people say it is. And it is the LJN A Nightmare on Elm Street for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a pretty solid side-scrolling beat-em-up platformer with some supernatural horror elements. The common criticism is it's too hard, but it's an NES game, so it's just NES hard. It's not excruciatingly hard. There are harder NES games that people are forgiving of, so I never accept it's too hard as a valid criticism of an NES game, because if you're going to say this is too hard, but Battletoads isn't too hard, you're stupid. You flat out are, because Battletoads is twice as hard, at least twice as hard as this game. The other common criticism is it's too generic villains, ghosts, skeletons, etc. Freddy used those things in the nightmares. He used a pig. He used a dog with a baby's head on it. He used a snake. He used He literally just used generic things. He uses your fears. So I don't accept that as a valid criticism either. If you don't like the gameplay, fine. If you don't like the graphics, well, I guess. It's pretty good graphics for an NES game, but very innovative considering it is, to the best of my knowledge, the first 4-player beat 'em up on a home console. So you got to give it props for that. And the 4-player mode's actually pretty fun if you can round up 3 other people to play with, and you have the necessary accessories to do so. Number 21 comes from Disney and Capcom. There's a lot of Disney Capcom games on this list, I'll tell you right now, because they did it best. This is Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, also for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I can't tell you how many times I rented this game as a kid. It's a lot of fun. Just a blast. Number 19 is a slightly newer game. Not necessarily newer than Kingdom Hearts. It's in that era. But I would say this is the best of the franchise, possibly. Although there might be another one on this list. I don't know. You'll have to just keep watching. This is Dragon Ball Z Budokai for the Nintendo GameCube. Now, I know what you're saying. Isn't that also on PS2? Dog, get out of there. Psst. Mini? Technically, yes. However, the GameCube version is slightly better. And only slightly. It was enhanced a little bit, and it's the one I played. So, yeah, the PS2 version is good enough, too. It's not like, it's basically the same game. It's just they made some modifications and slight enhancements to the GameCube version, but nothing you're going to miss if you're playing the PS2 version, honestly, so still pretty good. This next one I didn't put a platform on because it's cross-gen, cross-platform. What that means is it was on everything, basically. Every game console that was currently on the market at the time. And this is Marvel Ultimate Alliance. So it was on like PS2 and Xbox, but it was also on PS3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii. It may have been on PC, I'm not 100%, but it should have been if it wasn't. Marvel Ultimate Alliance is probably the best 3D superhero beat 'em up that I've ever played, probably. But it's just a great game. Now, unfortunately, I will bitch about this. I had the Wii version, and while, yeah, graphically it's inferior to the HD consoles, it was comparable to the PS2 versions, I would imagine. The motion controls sucked. It just sucked. It should not have had motion controls. They didn't need them. It was the kind of game that should have had traditional controls, and this is one of my gripes with the Wii, excuse me. Not the GameCube. I love the GameCube. It had a real controller. Not a great controller, but anyways. Number 17 is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the arcade game. Now, this is specifically the one that has the machine gun that you shoot at the screen, and you're in the future shooting the exoskeletons, and then you go back in time, and then you're in the mall shooting, I guess, cops or whatever. I don't know. I don't remember. It's been so long since I played. Now, there are home console ports of this game. I believe it's on Genesis and SNES. Don't waste your time with them. Just track down a way to play the actual arcade version if you can, and you're good to go. Speaking of which, number 16 is Jurassic Park, also a light gun game in the arcade. If I'm not mistaken, this might have been a Sega game, but I'm not 100%, so don't quote me on that. But it was definitely a very fun game. I would say probably more fun than most of the home console Jurassic Park games of the era. Although the Genesis Jurassic Park game is a pretty good one as well. Speaking of Genesis games, number 15 is Aladdin for the Sega Genesis. Aladdin on the Genesis is the definitive 2D platformer of the Disney superhero by the same name. This is the version you want to play. The Super Nintendo version is fine in a pinch if you have nothing else, but the Genesis version is the real game. The SNES version is the dollar store knockoff. The equivalent of the Genesis game is Barbie and the SNES game is Bobby. You know what I mean? Anyways. Speaking of which, number 14 is Jurassic Park for the Sega Genesis. This is a side-scrolling action beat-em-up, hack-and-slash platformer type game, action game for the Genesis. Pretty standard for the Genesis. Sega was known for their arcade-style action games, and this is no different. I don't know if Sega developed this game, but I believe they did publish it, but I'm not 100% on that. There was a lot of that stuff going around back in the day. But really good game. And again, the definitive home version of Jurassic Park. You don't want to even bother with the Sega CD game, I'll tell you that right now. And the Super Nintendo game, we don't talk about that hot garbage. Number 13 is Garfield. I believe it's called Caught in the Act, or something like that, for the Sega Genesis. Really good game. 2D side-scrolling platformer, pretty standard for the era. Pretty solid gameplay. And it has a pretty neat gimmick. It was a repetitive gimmick at the time, you know, a cartoon character or anthropomorphic 2D side-scrolling, you know, animal dressed up like a human character, basically, on the Genesis. That was pretty standard. Traveling through different horror movies or different movies. But it's still fun. It's still a good, fun, solid game. Number 12 is Tiny Toon Adventures, specifically the NES version. The game on the NES. The platformer. This is probably the closest you're going to get to a platformer on the NES that is on the same level of Super Mario Bros. 3. It is that good. Number 11 is Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 on the GameCube. This is it is a sequel, but it's also kind of an enhanced remake of Rogue Squadron on the N64. But it's a pretty rock solid game. Number 10, we're in the top 10 finally, the best of the best. Number 10 is Super Star Wars, originally available for the SNES, but it has been upgraded to modern consoles. This is also a pretty standard 16-bit side-scrolling action game, but it does have some 3D levels and some cinematics for the time that were impressive on the hardware they were on. And it does feel like you're Luke Skywalker living the, you know, adventure he went on when he goes on his quest to blow up the Death Star. Very rock solid game. Number 19 is another arcade beat 'em up based on a forgotten animated show you probably never even heard of or you knew about and then your brain erased it. It is Cowboys of Moo Mesa. It is another 4-player side-scrolling beat 'em up. Pretty standard fare, but still pretty fun game. Number 8 and number 7 are the same game. TMNT 2, the arcade game, is number 8 on the NES, the home console port of number 7, the actual TMNT arcade game. They are two separate games. They are 70% the same game, but the NES version adds a ton of new levels and bosses and mixes up the content and changes the gameplay a little bit. But the original arcade version is slightly better because 1, it has better graphics, smoother animation. 2, it has clearer sounds and voices and more sounds and voices. And 3, it's 4-player. The NES version is only 2-player. Which takes me to number 6, which took this is a Konami game as well, took the formula that was perfected with TMNT, the arcade game, and its immediate sequel, Turtles in Time, which is not on this list, by the way, but I'll just spoil that right now. But number 6 took that formula and perfected it with X-Men on the Sega Genesis. This is the perfect side-scrolling action adventure beat 'em up in the 16-bit era. You're not going to find a better action adventure beat 'em up. Now, this one was made by Sega themselves. This was not Konami, actually. I misspoke. I apologize. Konami and Capcom also did a lot of Sega games back in the day. Sega was a big, or X-Men was a big property. Everybody was doing X-Men stuff. But anyways, the Genesis X-Men game, just titled X-Men, is one of the greatest 16-bit games of all time. And definitely one of the greatest X-Men games of all time, one of the greatest superhero games of all time, one of the greatest platforming beat-em-ups of all... I mean, it's just checks all the boxes. Goat, goat, goat all the way around. Number 5 is only slightly better in that it's got more fun gameplay, lighter, more lighthearted animation and music and theme and everything. And it is Cool Spot, which is based on the mascot at the time of the 7-Up soda pop company. Cool Spot was on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. I did not specify which version is in this spot because they're both nearly identical and good enough. They're both great games. Either version is going to just give you a blast. A great old time. Number 4 is another Disney and Capcom collaboration, this time also with Sega in the mix. It was not a launch title for the Genesis, but it was heavily promoted post-launch and just before Sonic the Hedgehog came out, so this was sort of the heavy hitter must-have title on the Genesis before Sonic came along. This is Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusion. Now, at the time of its release, it had the most realistic and fluid animation of any video game ever made based on a cartoon property that wasn't a Laserdisc game. Just like actual in-game animation. It was very notable, and it made headlines. It was talked about heavily on regular news outlets. Were impressed by how visually impressive this game was at the time. It's also hella fun. Number 3 is not a game you would expect if you watch my videos. Because I do not like this cartoon at all. And I do not care for this cartoon character at all. I've already done videos on how much I hate this dude. But SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom is not the best 3D platformer collectathon of all time, but it is the best one based on a licensed property, which is what this list is. Even though I can't stand SpongeBob, this was a fun game. This game was fun enough that it made me forget how much I hate SpongeBob, and I just had a blast playing it. Now, I had it on the GameCube, but I do believe it was also available on PS2 and has been upgraded for modern consoles in HD, so, definitely worth checking out. Number 2 was originally on the PS2 GameCube era consoles, and then also ported to the next-gen consoles, PS3, 360, Wii. And it may or may not have been re-released in HD on other consoles. I don't know, but I would assume so. But I'm not going to say yes or no because I haven't done my research. But number 2 is Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga. Anytime you have a Star Wars game, it runs the risk of being on the top 20-something licensed video games. I mean, there's already been a couple other Star Wars games on this list. This list could have just been all Star Wars games, and it would have been perfectly acceptable. Because there was a time before EA came along and ruined things that basically every Star Wars game ever made, with only like a handful of exceptions, were like the best game in whatever genre they were in. Just about. Lego Star Wars is no different. It is the Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga is the definitive Lego game and the definitive 3D platforming Star Wars game. Now, I know a lot of people are going to bitch and moan about number 1 for various reasons. 1, it's kind of an old game, but also kind of not. And 2, it's kind of a primitive game by today's standards, and some would say not as good as other games on this list, although I would argue they're wrong and need to either play it again or, I don't know, meet their expectations better, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. Number 1, greatest licensed video game of all time, is the HD remake known as DuckTales Remastered. Originally presented on the Sony PS3, but it was also ported very quickly to other consoles and I believe PCs as well, including the Wii U, the Xbox 360, the PS4, etc., etc. This is, in my book, the definitive 2D platformer based on a cartoon property. You're not going to get a better, more fun game than this. Not just because it's the only game on this list I beat without using cheat codes, obviously. It's that easy, but it's also that fun. But the remastered one, while it does make minor modifications to a couple of levels that kind of are intended to either make them easier or harder, depending on how you play the game, which may make some people upset. Overall, it's got better presentation than the original. It's modern HD graphics, very fluid animation that is actually more reminiscent of the cartoon it's based on rather than the blocky 8-bit graphics, which are not bad, but it also has enhanced music, but you have the option of using the actual 8-bit music if you prefer. And it has a whole shit ton of special features and unlockables, like, photo galleries and behind-the-scenes clips and artwork, and you can unlock the different music tracks and all kinds of cool stuff, which just makes this, probably in my opinion, the greatest licensed video game I've ever played. So much so that not only did I buy it on PS3, I bought it again on the Wii U and again on the PS4. I liked that game that much. I think I had it on PS4. Let me clarify. I don't know if it was on PS4 or not, but I did have it on PS3 and Wii U. But I at least bought it twice. I definitely bought it more than once. I can tell you that right now. And that's my list. Stay cool.